I'm still wondering why this is called the Eifel Grand Prix and not the German Grand Prix. Hello, my name is Alex Does F1 Stuff and welcome back to another one of my Formula 1 2020 race weekend reviews for round number 11 around... How did I mess that up? How have I done that? I can't believe... I've done how many of these and I've messed it up again. It is round number 11 in Germany for the Eifel Grand Prix around the circuit of the Nürburgring, a track we have not been to since 2013, a Grand Prix in which Sebastian Vettel won from Kimi Raikkonen and Romain Grosjean, with Lewis Hamilton taking the pole position. It is also a circuit in which 13 of the current 20 Formula 1 drivers have not driven around. But anyway, with that being said, let's move on into the little contents page. If you have not seen any of my race weekend reviews, you can skip to whichever section you would like me to talk about, whether that be practice, qualifying, or the race. Yes, skip to whichever section you would like me to talk about, but we are going to jump straight on into practice. And we open with nothing. No practice running on Friday at all. Both FP1 and FP2 were cancelled or abandoned, I think was the term, as the medical helicopters could not fly due to the fog. Now, FIA did then put in a procedure of how they could get around it if it was going to be foggy today or tomorrow. So hopefully if it is not foggy tomorrow, we should all be good. But with that being said, we did get some running this morning in FP3, and it was led by Valtteri Bottas. From Lewis Hamilton, then Charles Leclerc. In third place from Max Verstappen, then Sebastian Vettel. An incredible day for Ferrari. Then Norris, Perez, Ricciardo, Albon and Gasly are your top 10. But we start with Mercedes taking the early advantage in practice. Now, this is what I feel is going to happen in all of the other Grand Prix where we have no practice sessions, is Mercedes always seem to do well in practice one, in the first sort of practice where you can set up everything, because they had to do their qualifying runs, their race runs and everything like that. But I feel they're just so strong at the moment that they don't need practice 1 and practice 2. If anything, practice 1 and practice 2 enables the other teams to catch up a little bit. But anyway, it is Bottas who takes the first blow from Lewis Hamilton in second place. Just a tenth behind, just over a tenth behind, so not the end of the world, but definitely not the start that he'd have wanted in the slightest. But then next up is Charles Leclerc, having an insane performance from Ferrari. That Ferrari has seemed to have some pace this weekend. Third and fifth. Fifth for Sebastian Vettel at his home Grand Prix. I was very surprised when I saw that. I was at the gym at the time, but definitely an upturn in pace. I'm not sure if they brought any updates or anything like that, but it's incredible to see Ferrari actually performing well again. Just gotta hope they're doing it legally this time. That's the only issue. And then we move to Red Bull, and Max Verstappen is P4, 6 tenths or just over 6 tenths off of Bottas. Now that's not the end of the world, and they can probably claw some of that back, as they may have just been, no, I wouldn't say sandbagging, as there's no point to sandbagging anymore as the engine modes are gone. So perhaps that is their pace. Perhaps they will be 6 tenths off of the Mercedes, but maybe the Ferraris will drop back. Who knows, perhaps the weather could change, as it was nice and dry throughout the session, just extremely cold. But Alex Albon, though, down in P9, still 6 tenths back. That has been his average gap to Verstappen so far this year. It's been a mammoth gap. And then we get to McLaren. Now Norris is P6, and that is an incredible turnaround in pace after their dismal performance in Russia. Sainz failing to finish the race, Norris poodling around in like 14th place. They weren't really quick in qualifying or practice, and it's definitely good to see them back in 6th, and especially in front of the Racing Points and the Renaults as well. But Sainz is down in 13th, and again 7 tenths off of his teammate. Now that's a large margin, so perhaps Sainz did have a bit of an issue, but perhaps he is having a bit of an off day. I mean, I'd say he's having a bit of an off year so far from McLaren. He's definitely not as in tune as he was last year. And then moving to Racing Point, Sergio Perez has found his mojo once again, back in 7th place. I feel like he's doing this to just advertise himself, to get himself a drive for next year, as that's something that he doesn't have at the moment. And I believe the only real place that he could go is Haas, but it's looking likely that those seats are going to be filled, so perhaps he will ultimately lose his drive. Now, Stroll, all the way down at the bottom of the pack. No time set, he failed to even start the session. He was ill. Hopefully not COVID-related ill, they didn't say that, he just said unwell. However, it was ruled later on that he will not be able to compete in the rest of the Eifel Grand Prix weekend, and Nico Hulkenberg was called back in at 11 a.m. 11 a.m. Bearing in mind qualifying starts at about 3 o'clock local time, and he was called in at 11 o'clock local time. He had to drive just over an hour from his house in Cologne to get to the Nürburgring in his nice Porsche 911 GT3 RS. Get to the circuit, do all the necessary doodads, and drive the car for qualifying, as Lance Stroll had to withdraw. But we'll get on to qualifying in a little bit. He didn't partake in any of the practice sessions this weekend. And next we have Renault, and Daniel Ricciardo put in another solid performance for the Renault team. They've never really done too well in practice 1 so far this season. And then we've got Esteban Ocon at 3/10. That's not Esteban Ocon, that is an AlphaTauri. Okay, hopefully that sorted it back out. There we go, Esteban Ocon pops up just there. 3/10 off of Daniel Ricciardo and in 11th place. It's from Ocon. I was really expecting a little bit more, especially in the latter half of the season. I could kind of understand the first couple of races, as he did have a year out, coming to a brand new team as well. But now you would expect him to be a little bit closer, but he's not quite there just yet. And then we get to AlphaTauri and Pierre Gasly in P10. Another strong performance and another, I would say, AlphaTauri performance in P10, above the likes of the Alfa Romeo, Hasses and Williams, but behind the sort of front runners of the McLarens, Racing Points and Renaults, but mixing it with the sort of top 10 region of points. I hope that made sense. They're never really like 6th or 7th where McLaren or Racing Point are. They're usually 9th, 10th or 11th, in front of everybody else but behind the big points paying positions. I've spent far too long on that topic. Let's move to Danny Kvyat, 12th place and 2/10 off of Gasly. Not bad, but I was expecting him to carry a little bit of performance from Russia forward, but hopefully he can during qualifying. And then we've got Kimi Raikkonen down in P14, but honestly, P14, that is not bad in the slightest for the Alfa Romeo, and definitely Q2 potential for that car, but Giovinazzi finds himself down in P18. He is some 4/10 off, but ultimately I do feel there is Q2 potential for perhaps one of the Alfa Romeos, maybe 2. I think 2 is pushing it, but definitely 1 isn't the end of the world. Wrong saying, didn't know what I was actually going to say. I'll roll with it. And then we have Romain Grosjean down in 15th, but 15th is through. So again, like Alfa Romeo, I feel there is Q2 potential for the Haas car. And Kevin Magnussen is just there, just under 2/10 down on his teammate in 16th. So again, if the conditions are right, if he's out later on the track when the track evolution is at its best, he genuinely has a shot of going through to Q2. However, Russell, down in 17th place, I feel it's going to be a mighty struggle for Williams to get through into Q2. And as for Latifi, no. He's half a second off of Giovinazzi and 6/10 off of Russell. His average gap to Russell so far this year has been just over 7.5 tenths. It's not a very good season for Latifi at all. But with practice all done and dusted early on in the morning, we move to qualifying. Now, for the very first time this year, I actually watched the WTF1 watch-along. It was alright, not the best, not the worst. As, you know, copyright regulations and things, they can't show anything apart from their reactions, and it's a bit strange just watching someone's reactions to a thing that you're not seeing. If that makes sense, you understand what they're talking about, but you want to be able to see it. So it was a little bit strange on that respect, but I think they did a good job with it. But yes, we move into qualifying and we start with Q1, and Giovinazzi in the Alfa Romeo has made it through just 2/100ths behind, or in front, of Romain Grosjean in the Haas. But it is the second Haas of Kevin Magnussen in P12 who has also made it through, but unfortunately the Williams pair could not quite manage it. Russell was only 1/100th behind Grosjean, but still just outside of the Q2 potential, with Latifi down in 18th, 2.5 tenths off, with Raikkonen in 19th place and Hulkenberg unfortunately 2/10 off of Raikkonen in last. But honestly, That's not bad in the slightest. He literally had no practice running in the slightest. All his laps were done in qualifying, and to be 2/10 off of a car that he said was completely different to what he drove in Silverstone, around a track that he's had no practice in for God knows since the last time he drove around this track, didn't have any chance to do any simulator work, not bad at all. But looking a little bit further up that leaderboard, it is a strong performance from Ferrari, P6 and P9, definitely Q3 potential for at least one of them, and I would expect on their radar is for both cars to be in. Albon a little bit at risk, perhaps 8/10 off of Verstappen, who tops the session for the 4th time this year. It is not a Mercedes topping either Q1, Q2 or Q3, which is an 87.1% success ratio, if you want to call it a success ratio, something I worked out during the WTF1 watch along, but it is once again Bottas leading Hamilton. And then we move on into Q2, and out, unfortunately, is Vettel, but also out by quite a big way actually, almost 4/10 down on Ocon. It was extremely close from Albon to Ocon though, less than a tenth, about 0.08 of a second, covering just the top or the 7th to 10th, very, very close. Then we've got the two AlphaTauris, 12th and 13th place for both of them, and unfortunately, it was Gasly in front of Kvyat. It was close though, 0.07 of a second, not bad in the slightest, with Giovinazzi getting in front of Kevin Magnussen, who will start P15 for Haas. But crucially, as we head on into Q3, it is Hamilton who takes the lead, and takes the lead by a big way. 0.07 from Verstappen, that's actually quite close, but against his teammate, it is 0.6 of a second. That is massive. And then it's Ricciardo that is P4, Leclerc a mega 5th for Ferrari, then Albon 6th, and then Norris, Perez, Sainz and Ocon will be your Q3 contenders. And so we dive on into Q3, and it is a pole position for Valtteri Bottas. No, he didn't get a pole. I was about to say that's his second in a row, but he didn't actually get it in Russia. 2.5 at the end. That's actually quite a big gap. I know the biggest gap that Bottas has had so far in qualifying against Lewis Hamilton. And speaking of Lewis Hamilton, he almost started on the medium tyre, but after everyone else went out in Q2 again on the softs, he chose to go back out on the softs as well. It would have been a bad idea to start on the mediums as it is so cold, and it would have taken forever for those medium tyres to warm up. But ultimately starting second, I don't think is too bad, as Hamilton should be able to outrace Bottas, as Bottas definitely hasn't shown any sort of racecraft really. I feel that's a bit harsh, but he definitely hasn't shown the ability that he wants to win, that he wants to fight against Lewis Hamilton, so that's definitely an edge that Hamilton has so far. And third place is Max Verstappen, almost on the front row of the grid, and at some points we thought he was a contender for pole position, but ultimately not quite there. But third place, definitely a solid start for Verstappen, and if he can get in front of Bottas, or Hamilton or Bottas, both of them maybe, at the start, then that will be absolutely exceptional for his race, and he should be able to control it from there. But then fourth place, Leclerc, what a performance from the Ferrari man. Absolutely mega to get in front of Alex Albon by just 0.12 of a second. Honestly mega. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to hold on to that, but I think 5th place is what he could be aiming for in the race tomorrow. Then we've got Alex Albon, unfortunately again 0.5 back from Max Verstappen, a little bit quicker than his average so far. His average has been 0.660 seconds, and to be under that I suppose is a good thing, but still to be half a second down is huge. And then we have Ricciardo and Ocon, 6th and 7th. That is massive. That is a very, very good performance from the Renault boys, in front of the McLarens and in front of the Racing Points as well. So hopefully they can hold on to that performance and possibly mingle with Albon and Leclerc and get to 4th place. Who knows? And then Norris P8, a mega performance from the McLaren man considering the pace of that car so far, or especially in the second half of the season. It sort of dipped, but it may just be back on the rise once again. Then Perez finds himself P9. I don't know if he's actually had any of the updates yet put onto his car. I don't think he has. I think he's still running the original Racing Point update. update package, but to be in between the two McLarens is not bad in the slightest. Hopefully he can claw back some of those positions and maybe aim for a 7th in the race tomorrow, not too sure just yet. And then Sainz P10. He got happily into Q2 or into Q3, but then to be 5 thousandths off of not being 10th is a little bit frustrating, but I feel 10th is not bad, especially for the McLaren so far, as they did have a dismal race in Russia. They just want to get a double point score. That is all they need, and that is all they should try and aim for. And that is the end of the qualifying bit, as well as the small, tiny little section in practice. I tried to extend it just a little bit to talk about each team, whereas I normally talk about just a couple teams in practice, but yeah, it is what it is. Join me tomorrow for the race on Sunday. I think we can call that a race of attrition. There were a lot of retirements, a lot of reliability niggles, but perhaps that could have been because there was no Friday running. So perhaps the teams may not have been able to iron out any of the issues that they could have come across if they'd have done some race analysis and race runs on Friday, and that sort of gave us a decent race. But let's jump straight on into the results. It was a victory for Lewis Hamilton and victory number 91, equaling Michael Schumacher, the all-time win record, which has stood for 14 years. Or 13, depends on how you want to count it. In a awesome kind of emotional, I would say, ceremony where Mick Schumacher gave him the helmet of Michael when he was at Mercedes, actually, one of Michael's Mercedes helmets. It was just a really wholesome moment, really relatable to when Hamilton received a Senna helmet for passing his either pole positions or wins, I can't quite remember. But genuinely a decent moment, and a real shame that Michael himself wasn't there to do it for him. But into Hamilton's race, he actually had to kind of fight for it, especially in the first few laps up until Bottas's retirement. Bottas seemed feisty, but Hamilton ultimately got the better of him and was able to lead from there. And other than that small little battle with Bottas up until his retirement, it was fairly easy breezy for Lewis, no real troubles at all. However, Max Verstappen in P2 had a very decent race. P2 was the absolute maximum that he could have achieved, but he managed to actually stick it to the Mercedes. He never fell back. He never really fell back at all, and he was able to stay there, within 5 to 10 seconds of the Mercedes, and he managed to bag the fastest lap bonus point as well at the very end of the race. And P2, he was extremely happy for that. But the happiest man of all, Daniel Ricciardo, finally a podium in yellow, and Renault's first podium in the hybrid era and first podium since 2011. It did kind of look a little bit in doubt if it wasn't for that late safety car that came out with about 12 or so laps to go, but it was definitely a solid performance from Daniel Ricciardo. He never really set a foot wrong, 6th in qualifying and then 3rd in the race, definitely the progression that you want from Saturday to Sunday. And then Racing Point and Sergio Perez are P4. A podium was potentially on the cards. Like I said with the Ricciardo piece, if it wasn't for that last late safety car, Perez had the better tyre strategy, not pitting under the first VSC, and then pitting slightly later in the race on much fresher medium tyres. He was closing that gap, and it would have been within the last 5, maybe 3 laps of the Grand Prix. He'd have been there and had the tyre advantage over Ricciardo, and we'd have seen an incredible battle at the very end. But ultimately P4, a solid performance, like Carlos Sainz. A massive improvement from the past few races. He has had some absolutely abysmal luck in that McLaren, and to be P5, I think he can be happy with that. The car didn't ultimately have much pace, really. It definitely wasn't on pace with the Racing Points and definitely not on pace with the Renaults, but to be P5 and manage to beat the likes of Gasly, Leclerc and Hulkenberg, definitely a positive. And speaking of Pierre Gasly, he is up next, and what a season this man is having. A truly outstanding drive. P6, it was really good. Really good, this Grand Prix. Overtaking was incredible. His defense against Albon was insane. Absolutely just tough. to the nail. It was absolutely amazing to watch. And as the commentator said, it was personal. Every battle between Albon and Gasly is extremely personal. And also to beat Leclerc as well in a fair fight. I would say those cars are fairly even, the Ferrari and the AlphaTauri. And for Leclerc to finish P7 after starting P4, a little bit unfortunate that he went backwards, but ultimately the Ferrari didn't really have the race pace to challenge, and I feel 7th was the best that he could get. And he definitely held off the likes of Ricciardo in the early parts of the race for a very long time. Another driver that had an extremely solid defensive drive. And then we get to Nico Hulkenberg, the man of the entire weekend and easily the driver of the day for the Eifel Grand Prix. A mega performance from the German. There's nothing else to say about it. He never really put a foot wrong. I mean, the occasional mistake, the occasional lock-up, but everyone was locking up. People like Hamilton, people like Verstappen and Bottas, etc., they were all locking up as well. So you can just, it was a solid race, a solid race. Hopefully he comes back again, maybe this season for Racing Point, as they're the only people that have had issues with illness this year so far, and hopefully he comes back next year in some way, shape or form. And then Grosjean, P9, picking up his first points of the season, 2 points, and a decent race for Grosjean and for Haas as well. But he did have that issue with his finger though. Kimi Raikkonen went off or something like that at one point. I don't think it was the incident with Russell, as Grosjean wasn't really around that sort of point. But he had some gravel flicked up and it hit his finger, and he said on the radio he hoped it wasn't broken, as he felt it was like a super sharp, stabby sort of pain. And you can imagine a bit of a bit of gravel coming at you from some ridiculous speed, hitting your finger. That's gonna be very painful. So I'm not sure what's actually happened with that. I haven't heard any news after this, but fighting through the pain and managed to get some points in this race. Sort of tailed off at the end of that one, but we got there. And then Giovinazzi, his second points of the season so far. Another stellar drive, and points for both Haas and Alfa Romeo. Not bad in the slightest, but I mean, we did have 5 retirements and definitely people that should have been in those points paying positions. So you could argue that they're maybe not justified, but points are points. And points for Giovinazzi is definitely a good thing. Trying to just keep that momentum up. He needs to show that he deserves that seat, as at the moment I don't think he's quite doing enough. He needs to be up with Grosjean, he needs to be consistently beating Raikkonen, he needs to consistently be beating the Hasses and the Williams pair, but sometimes he's not always there. And then we get to Sebastian Vettel. He spun once again. No collision, nothing at all. He was going to overtake an AlphaTauri, did a small little cutback manoeuvre and then spun. As simple as that, and that just sort of ruined his race. He was on a decent strategy. He then went on to the hards after this because he flat spotted all 4 of his tyres. But the hards, no one ran them. No one ever ran them up until Vettel during the race, and they didn't last. They didn't really work in the slightest, and he had to come back in yet again. His race was ruined because of the spin. And then we have Kimi Raikkonen. I don't know what to say about Kimi Raikkonen. He became the F1's most experienced racer in history. 323 race starts, but he did punt Russell off of the track, earning himself a 10-second grid penalty or a 10-second time penalty. I don't think it was like a rookie error. He kind of went into the first corner, locked up, and then sort of just washed wide. It's definitely his fault, but I don't think it was like a rookie error or anything like that. He just sort of got the corner wrong. And then we have Kevin Magnussen. I don't know. What happened to Kevin Magnussen? Nothing, really, I don't think. He was nowhere. Didn't manage to get through into Q2 like Grosjean did. Or was it Magnussen that got through? I can't remember. One of them got through. But I was expecting Magnussen to be with Grosjean, or ahead of Grosjean, as he has so often been this season, and he wasn't. I never really saw Magnussen at all during the race, to be honest. So I don't know whether there was an issue, whether there was anything wrong, or something hampering him. I don't know. And then Nicolas Latifi. Again, god damn, it did such a poor performance. It really is. Just I don't know what to say about Nicolas Latifi. That car had points potential. With Russell at the wheel, that car had points potential, as Russell was with Raikkonen. He was ahead of Raikkonen and battling with Vettel for most of the time, and he'd have been there. He'd have been 10th, 11th sort of region, and he could have got some points. And then to see Latifi 14th and 5 seconds off of Magnussen, who's 8 seconds off of Raikkonen. What happened? What happened, and what is happening to Williams? They had such a strong start to the season and it's disappeared. And then Danny Kvyat, a race to forget for the Russian. It was no fault of his own, whatsoever. It was Alex Albon's fault that ruined his race. Alex Albon just wasn't done with his overtaking manoeuvre, and then he cut back across and sliced off his front wing. So it's a bit of a shame, and then he had massive floor damage as the wing got stuck underneath the car and then was bashed out onto the main straight, which is a big shame for Kvyat, as he was doing okay, and he definitely could have had some points, especially given the pace of Gasly as well. So it could have been a double points race for AlphaTauri, but unfortunately Albon came in and ruined that. But then we get to Norris. Now Norris was actually running really well this race. He was up in P3 at one point. Admittedly, he didn't pit under the first VSC, but he was on the same strategy as Perez. He would have been with Sainz as well. He would have been in the top 5. And unfortunately, his engine conked out, which did actually lead to the late safety car being called on lap 45, something like that, which led to a sort of confusing safety car period. It was a little bit long, and we weren't really sure if the safety car needed to be called out, as they removed Russell's car quite happily under VSC, so why didn't they just implement the VSC for Norris? Not 100% sure, but it did give us a nice 10-lap sprint to the end. And then Albon. I don't want to be too mean, but that was shit. That, abysmal, rubbish, doozy, any negative word you want to use, however bad you want it, throw it his way. That was a poor race. Poor qualifying, again half a second off of Verstappen, admittedly a little bit faster than the 6/10 on average that he's been behind so far this year, but still half a second off. In the race, yeah, it was a struggle. He couldn't get past Gasly. He then wiped off the front wing of Kvyat. Then he had the 5-second penalty. Then he came into the pits, and then he had a reliability issue. It was rubbish. An absolutely appalling race. I don't even think he'd have beaten Leclerc or Hulkenberg in this race, even if he managed to get past Gasly. It just wasn't a good race for him at all. Ocon, unfortunately, I couldn't find a decent picture of him, but again, he wasn't really running super well. He wasn't with Ricciardo on pace. He was probably with Gasly, Leclerc kind of pace, and then he had his reliability issue. And then Valtteri Bottas. What absolutely rubbish luck this man had this race. He challenged Lewis. He had the balls, he had the cojones to challenge Lewis into the first corner, and just didn't quite get there. Well, he did. Lewis managed to get back past after Bottas's error into the first corner, but then he lost power and his car broke. It's just a shame that Hamilton then went on to win, and he now has a 69-point lead in the Constructors. And that is the end of the race review. We will now delve on into the championships. As I just said, Lewis Hamilton has a 69-point lead in the championship now, with Verstappen closing in on Bottas, with Ricciardo moving up to 4th, then Perez, Norris, Albon, Leclerc, Stroll, Gasly are your top 10, with Mercedes pulling away once again, 180 points clear of Red Bull in the Constructors, with Racing Point now 3rd ahead of McLaren and Renault, and then we've got Ferrari, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo and Haas, who all pick up points, with Williams still on 0. And for those that like a bit of a visual representation of the data, here is the graph of the Drivers' Championships of the exact table that you've just seen, and then we have the Constructors, with once again Mercedes leading the way from the very start and pissing off into the distance. Now, as with the past few of my race weekend reviews, I have been making the Formula 1.5 graphs as well. I have made 2, here is the first set, and this one excludes Mercedes and Verstappen, and we've got Ricciardo leading the way on 140 points, from Albon, then Perez, then Leclerc, Stroll, Norris, Gasly, Sainz and Ocon. And then in the Constructors for this one, it is Racing Point still holding on to their lead, from Renault now in second, from McLaren, Ferrari, AlphaTauri, Red Bull, Alfa Romeo, a long way back, over 100 points down, then Haas and Williams. And then for the second set of Formula 1.5 graphs, I have one that excludes both Mercedes and both Red Bulls, as some people thought it was a bit unfair that I was still choosing to include Albon in the championships, and we have Ricciardo leading the way even further in front of Perez, then Norris, Stroll, Leclerc, Gasly, Sainz and Ocon once again, with the Constructors' Championship looking much the same. Racing Point in first, from Renault, from McLaren, from Ferrari, from AlphaTauri, from Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams. And that is the end of my race weekend review for the Eifel Grand Prix. Thank you guys so much for watching, and catch me in the next video with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.